Hello viewers, welcome to CEC-UGC lectures. I am Dr. Sunawar Soham from Department of Botany, Kalindi College, University of Delhi, and today I will be continuing with Ecological Factors in Plant Ecology series. As you remember, in the previous lectures I had briefly discussed about the temperature, as it is, we all know, is one of the important abiotic factors that is crucial for existence of living organisms. It regulates various essential activities such as growth and reproduction. Temperature shows variation from region to region depending upon the topography, latitude and longitude. Temperature varies according to the geography of the region. Temperature gradients depend upon the presence of barriers such as mountain ranges and ocean currents. Now, let's move on to the latitudinal and altitudinal variations. Variations in temperature on Earth occur from changes in incoming solar radiation and the distribution of land and water masses. Now, the physical factors such as movement of wind, water, the direction of the slopes of the hills and mountains also bring alteration in the temperature. The length of the day varies with the latitudes. The rate of incoming solar radiation varies from one region to another. On an average, every point on Earth gets the same hours of sunlight, that is round about 12 hours a day, but the rate of heat received varies from region to region. This depends upon the amount of radiant energy which is delivered, unit area per hour and the angle of incident light. So, as you can see in the diagram, the angle of incidence, the angle of basically the angle in which direction the sun rays are falling on a particular region or a point, it also brings changes in the temperature of that region. The vertical beam of radiation is more intense than an oblique beam. The amount of incident radiant energy per unit area increases along the latitudes. Now, at lower altitudes, the rate of warming by absorption of solar radiation is greater than the rate of cooling of outgoing infrared radiations. Now, the reverse is true for higher latitudes, that is, rate of cooling is more than the rate of absorption. Now, the poles receive only 40% of radiant energy that received by the equator. The places located at the same latitude show differences in temperature. This happens because of movement of hot and cold air currents and the water masses which are present in the region. Now, for example, if we take the example of cities such as Calcutta and Nagpur, which are located at the same latitude, but there is variation in temperature. In Calcutta, the temperature is regulated by sea, which is present in the proximity. Land and water absorbs heat differently, and this produces contrast in temperature within the same latitude. Now, the temperature at these places show diurnal and seasonal variations. There are three distinct heat zones which have been distinguished in each hemisphere based on temperature variations. These includes torrid zone, which are found near the equator, the moderate or temperate zones, which are located in the middle latitudes, and cold zone, which are located at the poles. I will discuss about these regions shortly in detail. Each temperature zone comprises of a particular vegetation and animal species. Now, let's move on to the altitudinal variations. Now, temperature decreases with increasing altitude. We all know that. This is mainly due to changes in the convection of troposphere. Troposphere is the lower layer of the atmosphere. In this slide you can see the air present on Earth's surface gets heated up by the solar radiation. The convection currents transport air from the lower to the higher region and vice versa. Now in this you can see that the Earth's surface, it is heated up by solar radiation, due to which convection currents are formed and they transport air from the lower to the higher region and vice versa. When air from the sea level rises to the upper atmosphere, it expands and increases in volume. During the expansion of gases, the molecules push aside the neighboring molecules, losing the kinetic energy, which leads to decrease of temperature. The condition of temperature in which no change of heat takes place between system and surrounding is termed as adiabatic change. Now there are various regions of Earth's surface that possess temperature ranges with an annual mean temperature. The continental land masses have broad temperature ranges. The southern hemisphere has less temperature variation than the northern hemisphere, and this is because southern hemisphere has more masses of water in comparison to the northern hemisphere. Now if we move on to the global temperature distribution, we will see that the temperature differs from one part of the world to another. The amount of insolation received determines the temperature of the Earth. Thus, latitude, altitude, distance from the sea, surface features and landscapes, there are some very important factors that affect the distribution of temperature. Now, insolation is highest at the equator. Thus, we all know that the temperature is high near the equator. Altitude is second major control of temperature of a place. How? Because we know that the temperature depends upon albedo of the surface. Now, what is albedo? It is the measure of diffusive reflection of solar radiation out of the total solar radiation which is received by a body. So, another major factor affecting the distribution of temperature on Earth is existence of land and oceans. There is more land in northern hemisphere and more water in southern hemisphere. There is therefore a difference between the specific heat of land and water. Thus, continents get heated faster and also cool faster in comparison to the oceans. The loss of heat from the continents is fast as compared to the oceans. If we see the highest and the lowest temperatures that are observed in the interiors of the continents, it is due to the difference in the specific heat. The moderating effect on temperature of land is due to proximity of the seas, and this is called maritime influence. The increasing effect of temperature of land at the interior of the continents is called continental influence. The temperature variation occurs both horizontally as well as vertically. Now, distribution of temperature across the latitudes over the surface of the Earth is called horizontal distribution. The global distribution of temperature can be represented with the help of isotherms. Now, isotherms basically represent the horizontal distribution of the temperature. Basically, these are the imaginary lines joining the places having equal temperatures. They run parallel to the latitudes, and the spacing of isotherm indicates the latitudinal thermal gradient, that is, the steepness or slow gradual nature of temperature change. Close spacing indicates a rapid change in the temperature, and wide spacing indicates slow change. Now, some amount of insolation is received by all points located on the same latitude. Hence, the isotherms show close correspondence. The temperature above the oceans and the land masses, they vary even at the same latitude because of differential heating of land and water. Now, the difference between the mean temperature of a place and the mean temperature of its parallel latitude, is called the temperature anomaly or thermal anomaly. Now, the temperature variation along latitude varies on the account of altitude, land water contrast, prevailing winds and ocean currents. The largest anomalies occur in the northern hemisphere and the smallest in the southern hemisphere. Now, if we see in this slide, you can see the anomaly is said to be negative when the temperature is at a place which is less than the expected temperature of that particular latitude. Conversely, the anomaly is positive when the temperature at a place is more than the expected temperature of a latitude. For the whole year, as a whole, the anomalies are negative over the continents from about 40-degree latitude towards the poles and positive towards the equator. Over the oceans, the anomalies are positive polewards for about 40-degree and negative towards the equator. So, you will see that you have observed that there is a shift. The anomaly is vice versa if we compare it with land and oceans. The highest temperatures occur over tropics and subtropics. These areas receive highest amount of insolation. The temperature gradient is closely spaced over middle and the higher latitudes. Now, isotherms are irregular over northern hemisphere due to enhanced land-sea contrast, because there is more land over water in the northern hemisphere and thus it tends to be warmer. The belt of high temperature widens over the continents. Mountains also affect the horizontal distribution of the temperature. Now, if we see the isotherm maps for January and July, they indicate changing patterns of global temperature with reference to the apparent movement of sun, the distribution of land and water, the ocean currents and the prevailing winds. Now, if we move on to the horizontal distribution of temperature, it is influenced by various factors. These include winds, nature of soil, the slope, topography, relief features, etc. In case of latitudes, if we now discuss in detail, the angle of incidence of sun's rays goes on decreasing from equator towards the poles. Higher the angle of incidence, higher is the temperature. Similarly, lower the angle of incidence, lower is the temperature. This is why the temperature is higher near the tropical regions and lower towards the poles. Now, let's move on to altitude. Now, the temperature in the troposphere, it goes on decreasing with the increase in height. Temperature decreases at an average rate of nearly 6 degrees Celsius per 1000 meter altitude. This is known as normal lapse rate. Now, if we talk about land and sea contrast, there is a great contrast between land and water surfaces because of the difference in the rate of heating of land surfaces. Compared to the land, the sea gets heated slowly and loses heat slowly. Land heats up and cools down quickly. Because of this, the temperature is relatively higher on land during daytime and it is higher in water during the night. The places which are situated near the sea, they come under the moderating influence of the sea and land breezes which moderates the temperature. There are also seasonal variations in the temperature of land and sea. During summer, for example, the air above the land has a higher temperature than the oceans, but the air above the oceans get higher temperature than land mass in winter. So, definitely the season also brings in variation in the temperature. Then a snow covered land, say in polar areas, it warms very slowly because of a large amount of reflection of the solar energy. So, because of reflection, the snow covered areas, they are cooler. They tend to be colder in comparison to a landmass which is not covered by snow. A vegetation which is covered land does not get heated excessively because great amount of insolation is used in evaporating water from the plants. The presence of warm ocean currents, for example in Gulf streams and in North Atlantic drift, the warm ocean currents, they make the North Atlantic Ocean warmer. So isotherms, they bend towards the pole. Why? The temperature decreases sharply and isotherms bend towards the equator in land areas. So the effect of oceans is well pronounced in the southern hemisphere due to few land masses. In the northern hemisphere, the land masses, they are cooler than the oceans. As the air gets warmed over the oceans, the land masses in the northern hemisphere, the isotherms bend towards the north poles when they cross the oceans, and to the south, which is like near the equator, over the continents. So the bending of isotherm is dependent upon the area and the air. So it tends to bend in the south over the continents. Hence, here the isotherms are more or less parallel to the latitudes, and the variation in temperature is more gradual than in the northern hemisphere. During summer, in the northern hemisphere, the isotherms bend towards the equator while crossing the oceans. Now towards the poles while crossing the land masses. Isotherms are wide spaced over oceans while they are closely spaced over the land masses. Now, how do ocean currents affect? So we all know that warm currents make the coast warmer, whereas cold currents, they reduce the temperature of the coast. So the northwestern European coast do not freeze in winter due to the effect of North Atlantic drift, which is a warm water current, while in Quebec on the coast of Canada is frozen due to the cold Labrador current which is flowing along with it. So depending upon the ocean currents, is it a warm or a cold ocean current, the temperature of the area is defined. Air mass also affects the temperature. The places which come under the influence of warm air mass experience high temperature, while the places that come under the influence of cold air mass experience low temperature. Now vegetation cover also define, or it also tells about the temperature or brings in variation in temperature in a particular area. The soil devoid of vegetation cover receives more heat. Vegetation cover absorbs much of sun's heat and it prevents radiations which reflect back in the atmosphere. Hence, the temperature variations in densely forested areas, it's lower than those in the desert areas. Now let's move on to the vertical distribution of temperature. Temperature in the troposphere, it decreases with the increase in the altitude. Lapse rate is uniform at a given level at all latitudes within the troposphere. In the lower stratosphere, the lapse rate remains constant for some height, while higher temperature exists over the poles because this layer is closer to Earth at the poles. So, long winter night, clear sky, dry air and absence of winds lead to quick radiation of heat from the Earth's surface as well as from the lower layers of the atmosphere. This results in the cooling of air near the Earth's surface. The upper layers, which lose their heat not so quickly, are comparatively warm. During winters, the mountain slopes, they cool very rapidly due to quick radiation of heat. The air resting above them becomes cold and its density increases. Hence, it moves down the slopes and settles down in the valleys. This air pushes the warmer air of the valleys upwards and leads to the phenomenon of inversion of temperature. Now, high slopes remain comparatively warmer. Movement of heavy and dense cold air towards the valley slopes is termed as air drainage. Now, in this slide, you can see that Earth is generally divided into three broad temperature zones. You can see the torrid zone, the temperate zone and the frigid zone, which is at the poles. Now, the torrid zone is near the equators, then comes the temperate zone, which is in the middle latitudes, and frigid zone near the poles. Now, what is torrid zone? It is a tropical region. It exists on both sides of the equator. It extends to the Tropic of Cancer in north and Tropic of Capricorn in south. The temperature remains high. This is because sun is directly overhead during some time of the year. Now, in the northern hemisphere, the overhead sun moves north from the equator until it reaches 23.5 degree north, which is the Tropic of Cancer, for the June solstice. This zone forms the hottest region of the world. Now, this zone, the torrid zone, includes most of Africa, Southern Asia, Indonesia, Guinea, Northern Australia, Southern Mexico, Central America, Northern and South America. Now, if we talk of the temperate zones, they are mid-latitudinal areas. The temperature is moderate in these zones. There are two temperate areas, north and the south. The sun is never directly overhead in the temperate zones. The climate ranges from warm to cool. This region experiences 4 seasons, namely spring, summer, autumn and winter. The north temperate zone includes Great Britain, Europe, Northern Asia, North America, Northern Mexico, while the southern temperate zone, they include Southern Australia, New Zealand, Southern South America and South Africa. If we talk of frigid zones or the polar regions, they experience the midnight sun and the polar night for part of the year. This day is 1 year long with 6 months of day and 6 months of night. These regions are the coldest regions of the earth and they are covered with ice and snow. Now, in the second part of the lecture, I will be discussing the adiabatic heating and cooling. Thank you so much.